Hello, and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series and Podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I am joined today by Jonathan Spire to co-host this webinar. For our viewers, please, should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question at any point during this discussion. I will now turn the discussion over to Jonathan to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Stacey. And we are, I think, very lucky today to have with us Dr. Yuval Steinitz, who's going to be speaking to us about a fascinating episode in which he was deeply involved, namely the process by which Israel discovered the existence of a secret Syrian nuclear project, and then, of course, went on to destroy that project through air action in September of 2007. Dr. Steinitz is a philosophy professor by background, but he served as Minister of Finance, Minister of Energy, and Minister of Intelligence, also in Israeli governments over the last decades. And he was also chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee of the Knesset. And this was the position which he held at the time when the process began of Israel's discovery of the secret Syrian nuclear program, about which he's going to talk. So the process will be that Dr. Steinitz will speak for around 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers and discussion. So I hope Dr. Steinitz is on the line, and if so, I invite him to begin his address now. Thanks.
Hello, good evening from Jerusalem. It's now 9 o'clock here in Mevaseret Zion, a suburb of Jerusalem, and I'm very happy to join the Middle East Forum in this discussion of recent history. So I didn't listen, but just give me instructions, or because I just joined in.
Yeah, if you could, Dr. Steinitz, if you could speak for 15 minutes about the subject in question, and then we'll have time for questions and answers following that. Thanks.
Okay, so the subject in question, as I understand it, is the role of the Knesset, Israel Parliament, the Knesset Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations in the intelligence discovery of the Syrian nuclear project. And the story takes us almost 18 years ago. I became chairman of the Knesset Committee of Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee at the beginning of 2003, just 2 months before the American war in Iraq. And like United States and like Britain, also here in Israel, we were informed by our intelligence community, the IDF intelligence and the Mossad, that Saddam Hussein still have in his possession weapons of mass destruction, mainly chemical weapons, sarin nerves gas, and between 50 and 100 long-range ballistic missiles that can carry such weapons over Iraq and Jordan to Israel. And of course, we made all the preparations. We produced several million gas masks to distribute to 9 million Israelis, to all our citizens. We called some reserve units, and we made all the preparation to intercept the incoming missiles and to defend ourselves. And then the war was over. And to our amazement, and to the amazement of almost everybody, also in the United States, in Britain, and in the entire world, Iraq was totally captured by American and British forces, and they found no one missile and not even one little bottle with nerve gas. And what was even more important, that thousands of prisoners of war were investigated from the Iraqi military, and nobody testifies that he was part of weapon of mass destruction units or storage or anything like that. It actually became evident that there was nothing there. And as the new chairman of the committee, I took the decision. It took me 2 months after, in April 2003, to establish investigation committee, inquiry committee, to investigate this intelligence failure. No doubt it was a very serious failure of the Israeli intelligence community, but also of the United States and all Western intelligence services. And I decided that although we were not directly involved in this war, and we didn't lose even one soldier or one citizen, this is serious enough, and I have to make a thorough investigation, not in order to point to somebody or to blame somebody. I made it crystal clear from the beginning that I'm against blaming people even after failures, but only in order to draw conclusions and to see how we can improve ourselves and what can we learn from this accident. So I established the committee based on the subcommittee on intelligence and secret services. And we began to work on this issue. Meanwhile, several weeks after we started the work of the commission, it came to our knowledge that Libya had a nuclear project of its own, and we were totally unaware of it. It were the British, the MI6, the British intelligence, that discovered it almost by occasion. They intercepted a ship that was delivering some equipment to Tripoli in Libya, and once they open the containers on this ship that came, I think, from Malaysia to Libya, they discovered a centrifuge for the enrichment of uranium, and they informed the Americans, and together, at the beginning, clandestinely, United States and Britain began to speak with Libya in order to force it, to pressure it to dismantle its a nuclear project that was already in a significant stage of construction. The problem from our perspective was that we were not aware of it unless we were informed by the Americans that were informed by the Brits. And I immediately added this as another subject, as a secondary subject to this inquiry committee, also to try to understand what was wrong. How could it happen that a very hostile Arab state with a very crazy leader like Muammar Gaddafi then was trying to develop nuclear weapons and we were unaware of it. Anyhow, during our work on Iraq and on Libya, in Iraq we overestimated, there were no weapons of mass destruction. In Libya, it's not underestimate, we were totally unaware that something is going on. I discovered that our intelligence toward non-conventional weapons programs, and especially toward potential or possible nuclear projects, is lacking, is not perfect, is far from being perfect, and there is no. And I came to the conclusion that we need specific doctrine, intelligence doctrine, a new intelligence doctrine, in order to monitor and to explore and to discover secret nuclear projects in the Middle East. And it took me another few months, and I cannot elaborate everything. We have had some pieces of intelligence. I can speak about one piece. One piece was speaking about experts or delegation from North Korea that visited Syria a few years before, but nobody took it seriously in our intelligence community. I came to the conclusion, everybody were looking at the Iranian nuclear project already in 2003. It was 1 year after somebody exposed the huge underground bunkers in Kashan or Natanz. And in 2003, everybody were, our intelligence community, and I think also the United States and the European intelligence services, everybody looked at Iran. It was already well known and clear that Iran is trying to produce nuclear weapons, and some negotiation between the peace treaty, the European countries, powers, Britain, France, and Germany, between them and Iran already started about freezing the program. And also the Israeli community was totally focused, speaking about nuclear threats, on Iran. And I came to the conclusion that it's highly probable that not only Iran, but Syria is also trying to produce nuclear weapons. There were some pieces of data, but nothing conclusive. But the main argument was logical reasoning. I told myself, first, that it will be very reasonable for Assad, for Syria to try to gain nuclear weapons because of all the rumors about the Israeli capabilities, because Syria, after the peace with Egypt and Jordan, Syria actually left alone vis-a-vis mighty Israel. And I told myself, if somebody would tell me that they were trying and failed because they don't have the technological capabilities and they don't have the resources, they are not as rich as Iran or Libya or Iraq, I would accept it. But to tell me that they never tried even, it looked to me a little bit problematic. What was more significant even that Assad, also Hafez al-Assad, but more often Bashar al-Assad, his son, the new president of Syria, spoke about his aspiration, his plan to gain a strategic balance or strategic deterrence vis-a-vis Israel. And this was, he reiterated it once and again. In Israel, everybody said, he meant to chemical weapons with ballistic missiles. He meant chemical weapons in order to balance the rumors that I cannot verify or disverify about the Israeli nuclear capabilities. And I said to myself, this doesn't sound to me, because he said that he aspired or he wished to gain strategical balance with Israel. If he would aim to chemical, to nerve gas, to sarin and chemical weapons, he shouldn't say that he aimed to gain them, because he already got them for 40 years. Syria have got a chemical stockpile already from the beginning of the 1980s of the 20th century. But he's speaking about aiming to gain a strategic balance with Israel. And I came to the conclusion that it's very likely that there is a tacit nuclear project going on in Syria, like what happened with Libya, like what's going on with Iran. I convinced my 5 friends in the subcommittee, in the inquiry committee, that it's very likely that there is something going on in Syria, and that if this is true, this is going to be a much bigger intelligence failure or fiasco from Israeli point of view, that Syria, we are looking at Iran far away, but Syria here, extremely in our immediate proximity, is trying to produce nuclear weapons, and we fail to notice. And they all, after several discussions, I managed to convince all my colleagues, 5 members of the Knesset that were with me at this inquiry committee. And in already, I think, April, something like April 2004, we didn't, before we concluded our secret report, I decided that this is too urgent, if I'm right, and I wrote a secret memorandum to then Prime Minister Sharon, Ariel Sharon, with copies to the Chief of Staff of the IDF, with copy to the head of the IDF intelligence, and with copy to the head of the Mossad. And in this letter, I urged Sharon, I told Sharon that I think that we might be facing a dramatic intelligence failure, worse even than the one that took place in 1973, prior to the Yom Kippur War, and I urged him to refer to this issue and to call the intelligence community and to discuss it with them as well. A few months later, we published our report. There was an open part of the report. We were the first. There were similar investigation committees in Britain and in the United States, but we were the first to establish such inquiry committee following the intelligence failure in Iraq, and we were the first to conclude our report. And in, I think, April or May 2004, we have made a press conference at the Knesset, and we published our findings with a lot of recommendations how to improve the Israeli intelligence community structure, how to improve how to prepare intelligence officer in a better way, how to build a special program in universities in Israel in order to educate our future intelligence officers and commanders, and many other recommendations, and how to develop a special doctrine for nuclear projects, a special intelligence doctrine aimed specifically at clandestine nuclear projects. This was an open public report. It got a huge coverage also in the United States. I remember in the New York Times, a very big article, a very big report. And 2 months later, we sent our a secret memorandum or secret report, only 9 copies, to Prime Minister Sharon and to the IDF in the intelligence services. And in this secret memorandum, there is a special part or chapter about the Syrian nuclear project, in which the committee is warning from a major intelligence failure with regard to Syria. We analyzed the very few evidence, but also all the logic and the reasoning. And we analyzed what can happen, how they might hidden it, and why it's so difficult maybe to discover it. And now we are coming to the most dramatic moment of this struggle, because we heard from the IDF and from the Mossad that there is nothing there, and they don't understand, and they are looking at it for many years, and nothing has been developed lately. And this is also the views of the American intelligence communities, that there is nothing in Syria. So I decided, I was afraid that they are going to ignore the reports of, after all, only 6 members of the Knesset, 6 parliamentarians, myself and 5 others. I decided to summon the heads of the IDF intelligence and the head of the Mossad every 3 months to the subcommittee only on this topic, the possibility of a clandestine nuclear project in Syria. And they have to give answers to the subcommittee about what, if there are new findings and what they are doing about it, and so on and so forth. So the first meeting that took place, I think, in July or August 2004, first came the head of the military intelligence, General Aharon Ze'evi Farkash, and 2 hours later, it was the time for the head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan. When the head of the military intelligence with his officers came to the room, I presented again our thesis and why I'm so cautious and concerned about what's going on in Syria, and he answered me something like that. That, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, you have to be professional intelligence officer. You have to be professional on intelligence to understand that what you are telling us is entirely impossible. I am telling you, as the head of the IDF intelligence, first, there is no clandestine military nuclear project in Syria. And secondly, I want to add that if there would be something like that in Syria, we would notice it immediately because we have such a good, excellent intelligence coverage of Syria. And unlike with other countries, unlike with Iran or Libya, in Syria, we would see such a thing immediately if something like this would have happened. My answer to him was like this. Told him, General Farkash, I appreciate you and your officers very much. And I myself not a professional intelligence person. I was only a simple soldier in the Golani Infantry Brigade, only a sergeant in the infantry brigade in my military service. But it so happened that I'm doctor to philosophy. That
Can I ask you to begin to wrap up, Dr. Steinitz, just because of time? Please begin to wrap up. Thanks.
Okay. I told him, but it so happened that I'm not a professional intelligence officer. I was just a simple infantry sergeant, but I'm a professional philosopher. And as a profession, you need to be a professional philosopher to know how to doubt things and dogmas and concepts. And as a philosopher, I doubt your self-confidence. And I think that you are facing a terrible intelligence failure because something is going on in Syria and you fail to notice it and you don't want even to investigate it because you believe that you know everything. Then came the head of the Mossad, Meir Dagan, and his deputy, Tamir Pardo, to the room. And the story repeats itself, but their reaction was totally different. They also said that they noticed nothing in Syria and that they consulted following our report with their American and British and friends all over the world, and nobody saw something in Syria, but they cannot disregard the fact that the Knesset subcommittee on intelligence secret service is so confident that something is going on in Syria. They are going to change their approach according to our recommendations. We gave some recommendation how it is hidden and therefore how we have to work in order to discover such a thing. It will take them a year or two to either verify or to confirm or disconfirm what we are saying. I help him also to get some a little bit additional money from the treasury in order to prepare this special program to monitor Syria in a different way. And 2 years later, the Mossad has discovered the pictures of the clandestine nuclear reactor in Deir Azur. And half a year later, it was destroyed by the Israeli Air Force at September 2007. I think this is a unique case, maybe not just in Israeli history, but in general history, that a parliamentary committee was the first to point out in writings, in documents, about a clandestine nuclear project much before the intelligence services have noticed it. So this is a background for this story, and now I'm open for discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Steinitz. And if I may, I'm going to ask the first question, which is the following. What, in your view, does this episode, this fascinating episode, teach us about the decision-making process in Israel? And what, in your view, were the factors that led to the system missing this information? And the fact that you were there, we got it, but without your committee, it would have been missed.
First, we were the first to point out and almost to force the Mossad, because the IDF didn't want to listen to us. The IDF totally disregarded us. But the Mossad took us very seriously, took our report very seriously. But maybe it would be discovered also without our intervention, by case of chance or I don't know. I cannot say that without our interference, it would be never discovered. And secondly, look, our military intelligence, and I believe also all intelligence services, were developed gradually. They have some missions and then came other missions. And our first mission was to, during the independence war of Israel, was to monitor the forces that are the Arab forces that invaded Israel from all over, from 7 countries, to try to kill this embryonic state. And they looked very closely, their capabilities were very limited in 1947, 1948, but they monitored the Palestinian population and the Palestinian militias and the progress of the Arab forces, the Egyptian army, the Jordanian, the Iraqi, the Syrian army, the Lebanese army into Israel to a certain extent. Then our services, secret services, developed with 2 main missions during several decades. One was to monitor the development of Arab armies around us, and the other was vis-a-vis terrorist groups, vis-a-vis the PLO, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, later on Hezbollah, that were trying to attack Israel or Israeli citizens. And this became a major task of the Israeli secret services, to defend and to enable us to intercept terrorist attacks. And they did an excellent job. Also today, we manage to intercept, I believe, 95% of the attack of the terrorist plot against Israel before they take place, even maybe more than 95%. This is really remarkable. But then came the issue of non-conventional weapons, especially nuclear weapons. This is totally a different story in my view. Because, I'll give you an example to do with Iraq, for example. We knew very well how many tanks and how many airplanes Saddam Hussein have got prior to the American war in Iraq in 2003. Because usually when country acquire, even a dictator is buying or producing tanks and armored vehicles and airplanes and helicopters, he presents them. He exposes them in military exercises or in military marches, and but when somebody like Saddam Hussein is developing chemical weapons, he is very careful to try to hide it because it's totally illegal. All the more so with regard to nuclear weapon, since it's totally illegal for Iran, for Syria, for Libya, for other countries, total violation of the NPT. And since it might bring a very strong international sanctions and isolation, there are enormous attempts to hide nuclear projects totally, and sometimes even to build a special mechanism that will deal with it separately from the regular defense establishment. Therefore, this is a unique task, with different difficulties that you have to try to resolve, and therefore you need a specific doctrine It's not good to take the regular intelligence doctrine that you prepare to monitor other armies and to say this is good also for nuclear projects.
Can I ask then a
totally different
question?
story.
Just so that brings us to a second question of mine, which is, I guess, a natural follow-on. As a result of what happened that you've described to us about the Syrian project and your discovery of it, was some mechanism created in the Israeli system to enable, to make sure that information like yours and insights like yours would come in, in a subsequent example? Was something changed in the system as a result of this episode?
I'm unable to elaborate too much about this. I can tell you that the Mossad immediately, following our report, they not only began to try to adopt a different approach vis-a-vis Syria, but they really changed the doctrine and even the priorities, because we also put a new set of priorities. We said, although it's sometimes less urgent than to prevent a terrorist attack here or to intercept a terrorist group there, nuclear projects in the Middle East or in the Near East should be our first priority. Yeah, this should get first priority, although some other things looks more urgent sometimes. The Mossad immediately adopted several of our secret recommendations, and I believe one can say that they made some remedies to their intelligence doctrine. With the IDF, it took longer, but I can tell you, first, I'm not quiet at all. It might repeat itself. And second, following this case, there were several changes, significant changes, that have been made both in the Mossad and both in the IDF intelligence. I'm unable to elaborate more, but nowadays I can say that, although it's beginning, by the way, especially in the IDF, they were furious that we are trying to teach them intelligence. We didn't, but we were trying to point to some possible failures. But at the end of the day, it took several years, and they took it, at the end of the day, they took it seriously. And I believe we are in a better position today, although such ignorance and such failures can repeat themselves.
Thanks. So I'm going to read out a couple of questions from audience members now for you to relate to. And the first one is from Larry Greenberg, who writes the following: there is no question that the Iranian nuclear bomb program is Syria on steroids. Even elements of it are unknown. What lessons have been learned that can be applied to the neutralization or destruction of the Iranian threat or Iranian project?
Look, it's totally different situation. Of course, Iran is much stronger, bigger, and more dangerous countries than Syria or Libya. And if Iran will get nuclear, this is a devastating state for Israel's future. But this is also will produce immediate threat to Europe and later on to United States, because they are eager also to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles that once they will get nuclear will be capable of carrying nuclear bombs directly to New York or Washington. This is on their agenda. They are working on it. Also on, they called it satellite launchers, but this is just it disguised like satellite project, satellite launching projects, but actually it's intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's the aim of the project. But even more than that, if Iran will get nuclear, this is the end of the NPT, of the Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Non-Proliferation Regime. Look, this was an American policy since the 1960s to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons around the globe. And it was quite successful policy so far. It's true that we have had to destroy 2 nuclear projects in Syria and Iraq, but also the project in Libya was dismantled and other countries were not trying to violate the NPT. And the world is relatively safe. But unlike North Korea, North Korea have got nuclear weapons. This is terrible. But Japan and South Korea didn't follow because they trust the United States deterrence and backing, and so far at least, they didn't start to produce their own nuclear weapons in order to balance or to threaten North Korea, okay? With Iran, it's going to be totally different. Once Iran will have nuclear weapon, immediately Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Algeria and maybe also the Emirates will follow. So this is going to be the end of the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. It's going to be a fatal blow to the American approach, to the American strategy for the last 70 years. So this is going to be devastating for Israel, for the Middle East, but for the entire world. And I think that the US policy of non-proliferation was a major issue in the past, and it should remain a major issue in the United States. And it doesn't seem so nowadays that this is a number one mission of the Western world under the leadership of the United States. Another thing that I'm learning is the difference between partial dismantlement of nuclear project and total dismantlement. Because look, in 3 countries in the Middle East, it's end up with total dismantlement. In Syria, we destroyed the nuclear project totally. They never resumed it. They didn't try even because they realized that they are exposed, and if we did it once, probably we will repeat it if necessary. So why spending several $1 billion if it's doomed to fail? In Iraq, when we destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor in, I think it was 1982, people say now Saddam Hussein, 1981, some people were saying he have enough money, Saddam Hussein, enough petrodollar, he will try again. He never really tried again because he realized that he cannot hide it, that we will discover it and probably will destroy it again, and he didn't, so. And in Libya, it was dismantled with an agreement with America and Britain, but the dismantlement was total dismantlement. Everything was dismantled and taken away from Libya. They never tried to rebuild it. And in North Korea, previous agreements, because you have had previous agreement with North Korea, were about freezing, about partial dismantlement, and look what happened. When you are satisfied with partial dismantlement or partial stopping, the temptation, because you still have some or most of your infrastructure, the temptation to resume one day, why you spend so much money and the infrastructure is still there, is enormous. The same with Iran. If to conclude the debate, the arguments that we have had vis-a-vis the United States and all the P5+1, just 7 years ago, before the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, we said that a good agreement with Iran should end with total dismantlement of the Iranian nuclear infrastructure for good, forever. And the American approach was that we can satisfy with partial dismantlement of only several elements in the program for 10 or 15 years. So what we see today is that the Iranians are enriching uranium to 60%. They never reached to such high levels. This is already a very significant level before, only last year. By the way, Trump left the agreement at 2018. They never dared to enrich uranium to high level, only last year. For 3 years, they avoided it. They didn't dare to cross the 20% threshold, only last year. And you can clearly see that if you are dealing with a country like Iran or North Korea, and you want an agreement or a distraction to prevail, You need a total dismantlement, either through
Right,
agreement or by brute force.
Thanks. One last question I think we'll have time for from Alfred Beagle, who asks, or Beigel, who asks, my reading of past reporting indicates the US initially tipped off Israel that something unusual was taking place in Syria about 5 years before Israel's destruction of the nuclear facility. Could you comment on this?
Well, in a very general manner. I don't want to comment on specific intelligence issues. There were, as I mentioned before, there were here and there some pieces of data that could raise some questions or some could cause somebody to wonder. But in reality, if to sum up, nobody took it seriously. And the best evidence for it is that the head of the military intelligence, General Aaron Zevi Farkash, by the way, a very smart person, a very professional officer. I have nothing against him. But when he was asked by the subcommittee at summer of 2004, the answer was, I am telling you, as the head of the IDF intelligence, that there is no clandestine nuclear project in Syria. You need to be a professional intelligence to understand that this is impossible. First, that it's impossible that there will be something like that. And second is that if it would happen, we would see it immediately. It would pop up immediately because we have such an excellent coverage. So this is saying everything. Of course, there were here and there some pieces that one should ask, what that mean? But nobody in the United States or in Israel or in Europe said it's probable, it's highly probable that there is a military nuclear project in Syria until the subcommittee have done it in several documents in 2004.
It's a fascinating subject, Dr. Steinitz, and thanks very much and very profoundly for giving us these insights. I'm afraid we're basically out of time. We could probably carry on asking about this a lot. This is a subject, the issue of national security decision-making in Israel, which, as you may know, the Middle East Forum is very interested in, and we'll certainly be interested in hearing more from you, I'm sure, in different forums and different contexts at a later date. But thanks very much for this opportunity. And I think that Stacey's going to come on to wrap things up. So thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and all the best to you and to all the listeners.
Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you, Dr. Steinitz, for joining us today, and for Jonathan Spire for moderating.
Bye-bye.
For our viewers, please join us Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.